At 3 a.m., my front door was kicked off its hinges, and from that moment on, I knew my family was no longer safe. I'm not exaggerating. This isn't a metaphor. I'm talking about an actual break-in in the middle of the night while my 12-year-old son and I were fast asleep. There was a crash like a bomb going off. Wood splintered, hinges snapped, and my front door flew across the room. Four men in black jackets with the words HOA Enforcement in bold white letters on their backs stormed in like a knockoff SWAT team. They shouted, HOA compliance check, freeze, do not resist. But this wasn't a movie, and they weren't cops. They weren't even legal members of any official HOA organization. They were just thugs wearing uniforms, thinking that a flashlight and a jacket gave them the right to bark orders at people. But that night, they made a mistake, a fatal mistake. They picked the wrong house to break into. My name is Jared Clean. I used to be an Army Ranger, but now I'm just a single dad living a quiet life with my son, Logan. We live in a peaceful lakeside neighborhood in Minnesota. My wife passed away 3 years ago from a brain aneurysm. It happened so fast, no one had time to prepare. Since then, it's just been the two of us, father and son, leaning on each other to get by. Logan is a smart, quiet kid. He doesn't like video games. He loves building Lego, but not superheroes. He builds tanks, military helicopters, with real suspension systems and track mechanisms. He reads books on tactics, on how soldiers think when they're surrounded. I tried my best to give him a normal childhood, to let him grow up like any other kid. But that night, that cursed night, it took away a piece of his childhood that I'll never be able to give back. And it all started with a woman named Karen, the self-appointed president of our neighborhood's HOA. I moved to this neighborhood after my wife passed away, not because I wanted to run from the memories, but because I wanted a fresh start. Somewhere quiet, with trees, a lake, and enough peace for a boy to grow up without carrying scars. We bought a small house at the end of a cul-de-sac, not fancy, but cozy. At first, everything was fine. Neighbors smiled and waved. Kids played on the lawn. No one talked much about the HOA, the homeowners association, because back then, it was just a faint name on a community board. Until Karen showed up. Her real name was Cheryl Ross. But I honestly believe the word Karen was invented for people like her. She wasn't elected. No one really knew how she became the interim president. One day, the old HOA president moved out, and the very next week, Cheryl announced, according to HOA bylaws, I have the right to assume leadership if the board lacks sufficient members. No one bothered to check the bylaws. No one wanted drama. So Karen took power, and our world started to change. At first, it was just notices. Trash bins left out more than 30 minutes after pickup will incur fines. Grass taller than 2 inches must be cut immediately. Children's toys must be removed from front lawns after 7 p.m. People thought she was just being overzealous, that she'd cool down eventually. But she didn't. She escalated. She fined a family because their front door was painted the wrong shade of white. It was ivory, not eggshell. Another homeowner was ordered to replace their entire roof because it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. I stayed quiet. I thought, don't get involved in petty politics. Until she came after me. I own an old Ford F-250 pickup. Used to be a military vehicle. I bought it, fixed it up, a memento of my time in service. I parked it neatly by the side of my garage. One morning, I found a note under the windshield. Karen wrote, military-style vehicles are not appropriate for residential communities. Violation of visual conformity, officially recorded. But she didn't just issue a fine. She added an administrative fee, a reinspection fee, a records processing fee. The total? $3,842. I went straight to her house, knocked on her door, looked her in the eye and said, slow and clear, this is harassment. I do not consent. Leave us alone. She smiled. Not the kind of smile you get from someone reasonable, the kind of smile you get from someone who just heard a challenge. She said, if you believe you're right, feel free to sue. But I have the law. I have authority. And right then I thought, okay, you want to play by the rules? I've lived through war zones. I know the law, and I know how to survive. But what I didn't know was how far she'd go. None of us did. After the day I confronted Karen, things got strange. I started receiving violation letters every week, sometimes for planting the wrong kind of flowers in the corner of my yard, other times for hanging the flag too low on a national holiday. There was even one notice demanding I replace the entire porch light fixture because the lighting failed to meet nighttime landscape aesthetics. I knew then she was retaliating, and I was right. Then came the strangest thing of all, an envelope with a bold, official-looking title, OA Warrant of Entry. It was a color-printed document, stamped in red with a signature and the heading, Neighborhood Task Force. The content claimed the HOA had the right to enter my home to conduct internal compliance checks and enforce penalties, and if I refused, they had the right to initiate property seizure actions. I held the letter in my hands, reading it over and over. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't HOA business. This was someone pretending to be the law. I took the letter straight to City Hall. They looked at me like I was telling a science fiction story. We don't grant enforcement powers to any HOA, they said, and the Neighborhood Task Force isn't a recognized legal agency of any kind. I understood then. Karen wasn't just abusing power. She was impersonating authority. I filed an official complaint with the county office. No response. I installed more cameras around the house, door sensors. I didn't want trouble, but I wasn't going to let my son live in fear. And then Logan, he started asking questions. One night, he walked into my room. He whispered, "Dad, what if someone breaks into our house? What if they have guns?" I sat up, looked him straight in the eyes. I've been a soldier. I know what real fear looks like. It's not on the battlefield. It's when your child asks questions no child should ever have to ask. I took a deep breath and said, "You never touch a gun unless I say so. But if someone comes into our home and I can't protect you, then you survive, any way you can." I taught Logan how to access the biometric safe in my closet, showed him how to check a firearm's safety. We practiced once every few weeks, not to turn him into a soldier, but to make sure that if the day ever came, he wouldn't be helpless. I didn't think that day would ever come. I didn't think Karen would go so far as to send men into my home in the middle of the night, posing as law enforcement. But she did. And in our darkest hour, my 12-year-old son, Logan, did something no one ever expected. That night started like any other. Logan and I had just finished dinner, watched an old documentary on TV, and went to bed around 10:30. Nothing unusual, no strange sounds, no warnings, just a normal night. Until the clock struck exactly 3:06 a.m. A loud crash exploded from the front door, like someone had slammed a sledgehammer straight into the hinges. Wood cracked, metal snapped. A voice shouted, "HOA enforcement, compliance inspection." I shot up from bed, heart pounding. In an instant, my hand reached toward the biometric safe beside my bed, where I kept my 9mm. But I was too late. One of them had already entered my room, a flashlight beam blinding my eyes. I squinted, instinctively raising my hands. He shouted, "Do not move. This is an HOA-mandated compliance check." Another ripped the blanket off me, eyes sharp like he was arresting a fugitive. I tried to stay calm. "You've got the wrong house. This is illegal." He didn't hesitate. "No mistake. Non-compliant vehicle recorded. We have the right to inspect and confiscate unauthorized property." No badges, no agency IDs, no real cops. Just men in security enforcement jackets with self-printed slogans. I spotted a third guy rifling through drawers in the living room. He yelled, "Cash found!" A fourth man stood in the hallway. And then I saw Logan. My son stood barefoot, trembling, wide-eyed with fear. He didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't run. He just quietly turned and walked into his room. I didn't see what happened next, but I knew, because I had taught him what to do. Logan opened his closet. On the top shelf sat a biometric lockbox, the same one we practiced opening once or twice a month. His fingerprint was stored as a backup. Inside was a Ruger 22, a small firearm, but a real one. Not powerful, but enough to hurt, enough to warn. And then I heard the shot. Pang! The entire house froze for a second. Then came the screaming. One of them collapsed in the hallway, clutching his thigh, blood soaking through his black pants. Logan stepped out, slow and steady, gripping the gun with both hands, exactly the way I taught him. His voice was calm, too calm. "Drop your weapons, or I'll shoot again." No one moved. The guy in my bedroom froze like stone. The one in the kitchen turned and bolted through the back door. The man in the living room hesitated for a second. Then followed. 3 of them were gone in seconds, their tires screeching down the street. Only one remained. the one who had been shot, lying on the floor groaning, unable to stand. Logan still stood there, hands shaking, eyes wide. I walked over, gently took the gun from his hands. His fingers were ice cold, his lips pale. I pulled him into my arms and whispered, "You did the right thing. I'm here now. You're safe." We called 911. I said clearly, my home was broken into. One of the intruders was shot in the leg by my son, in self-defense. The dispatcher paused for a few seconds, then responded, "Understood. Stay safe. Units are on the way." 6 minutes later, real police arrived, with badges, flashing lights, and actual warrants. They cuffed the wounded intruder, called an ambulance, and sat down to take my full statement. I gave them everything. The HOA jackets, the fake inspection letter, the printed warrant of entry I kept as evidence. One officer looked at the paper, frowned, then let out a laugh. "They tried to intimidate you with this? Did they print this at home?" I simply nodded. And that was the moment. The truth began to unravel. After the real police arrived, everything began to make sense, like someone had finally switched on the lights in a room that had been locked for far too long. I gave them everything I had: the fake HOA warrant of entry, the black vests labeled Neighborhood Task Force, a printout with a supposed HOA logo that looked like it had been copied from some clip art website. One of the officers flipped through the papers and shook his head. "I've been in this job for 19 years, and I've never seen anyone forge a search warrant and think they could use it legally." They documented the scene, photographed everything, seized all the counterfeit evidence. The man my son had shot, his name was Doug Freeman. And that's when the truth really began to unravel. Doug was Karen's boyfriend. And more than that, he had a prior conviction for impersonating a police officer. He was currently on probation, legally barred from any activity involving law enforcement or coercive uniforms. It didn't take long to trace the unmarked SUV the intruders had driven. It was registered under a company called Tactical Neighborhood Services LLC, owned by none other than Cheryl Ross, aka Karen. Yes, she had created a fake security company, printed fake badges, ordered uniforms off the internet, and appointed herself the community protector. No one elected her. No court granted her power. But somehow, she believed that with enough paperwork, rubber stamps, and a few men in black, she could control anyone. Karen was arrested the very next morning, right at her home. The charges? Conspiracy to commit armed home invasion, impersonation of law enforcement, endangering a minor, abuse of community leadership for unlawful coercion. As the local news picked up the story, other residents came forward, fined for parking the wrong way on the street, threatened with forced awning removals for visual violations, pressured to donate to a neighborhood security fund that turned out to fund Karen and Doug's personal expenses. It turned out the so-called Neighborhood Task Force was nothing more than a thin veil for a mini dictatorship, a mafia in business suits. The county office nullified all HOA citations issued in the past 6 months. The HOA was placed under temporary city-appointed oversight. Karen, who once called herself the standard bearer of the neighborhood, now faced real jail time. And my son Logan was completely exonerated. The police department issued an official statement. The act of shooting the intruder was justified self-defense. The situation was clear, no charges filed. The county prosecutor added, "This is one of the most clear-cut juvenile self-defense cases we've ever documented." No criminal record, no probation, no surveillance, just a 12-year-old boy who stood up and protected the father he loved. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt proud, and I did. But I also knew something had changed inside my son forever. After that night, nothing ever went back to the way it was. Karen was arrested. The police did their job. The man Logan shot needed emergency surgery, and he'd be spending a long time behind bars for violating his parole. Justice, at least on paper, was served. But what about what happened inside us? Logan didn't say much in the first few days. He's always been a quiet kid. But after that night, he became even quieter. He didn't sleep well. He'd wake up at 1 or 2 a.m. to check the front door. He placed a chair near his bedroom window to keep watch. One time, I caught him jotting down notes, tracking when the neighbors came home, when someone turned on their porch lights, like a soldier on night watch. I didn't blame him. I understood. He was only 12 years old, and he had to hold a gun to protect his father. I took Logan to therapy, We met with a child trauma specialist, someone who had worked with the children of war veterans. At first, Logan wouldn't talk. But then, one day, while we sat in the car together, he whispered, "Dad, I thought I was going to die that night." I turned to him, held his hand. I choked. I couldn't speak for a few seconds. Then I said, "You don't have to be strong all the time. You don't always have to protect me. That's what I'm here for, to protect you." That night, I slept beside Logan, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't wake up. We rebuilt everything, piece by piece. I replaced the front door, reinforced steel hinges, 4-point lock, installed a camera system around the house, not to live in fear, but to reclaim our sense of control. We repainted the porch, this time in combat gray, the exact color Karen used to hate the most. And then, Logan started to draw again. He used to sketch tanks, helicopters, military bases. Now he drew our house. But not just a house, a fortress, with tall walls, watchtowers, floodlights. In the picture, Logan and I sat in the living room, smiling. Behind us, my old guitar, and his favorite book on the shelf. No guns in the drawing, no blood, just the peace we had fought to reclaim. Sometimes people ask me, "Do you regret teaching your son how to use a gun? Do you regret letting a child do something he never should have had to do?" And I answer honestly, no, I don't regret it. I wish my son had never needed to use it. But that night, he didn't just save me, he saved himself. And he saved the very sense of safety in our home. Karen didn't just invade our house, she invaded our right to live without fear. And Logan, my son, stood up and said, "That's enough." I'm telling this story, not to be praised. I don't think my son is a hero. I think he's a 12-year-old kid who was pushed into a situation no one, especially not a child, should ever have to face. Not while sleeping in their own home. I'm sharing this because I know there are others out there living in neighborhoods just like mine. Maybe no one's kicked down your door at 3 a.m., but maybe, just maybe, you're being threatened every day through paperwork, through vague bylaws, through people pretending to have authority they don't. The problem isn't HOAs. The problem is fake power. When someone claims they have control over others and no one pushes back, bad things happen. We were lucky. We survived. But not everyone does. So I want to ask you, if someone knocked on your door at 3 a.m., holding a fake warrant, wearing a black vest, yelling compliance inspection, what would you do? Would you freeze? Would you fight back? Have you taught your child the difference between real and fake power? Between authority and abusive authority? And if your child were in that situation, would they know what to do? If you've ever faced something like this, an overreaching HOA, an abusive community leader, or someone hiding behind a fake badge to control others, share your story, not just to vent, but so others know they're not alone. Sometimes one voice, one retelling, is enough to wake up an entire community. As for Logan, he doesn't want to be a symbol. He just wants peace. He wants to live in a home where he doesn't have to check the doors every night. He wants to eat dinner with his dad, read books, build Legos, and laugh. And I promised him, from now on, that's all he'll ever have to do. If you're watching this video, hit like if this story made you stop and think. Leave a comment if you've ever faced something similar. And don't forget to subscribe, so you know you're not alone in the fight for the right to live in peace. Because sometimes, standing up to abusive power doesn't take violence. It just takes one voice, brave enough to say, "No, that's enough." I'm not telling this story to be praised. I don't need anyone to see my son as a hero. I'm just a father who had to watch his 12-year-old son stand in the dark, holding a small gun, and say to armed intruders, "Drop your weapons, or I'll shoot again." And in that moment, I realized the world isn't as simple as I once believed. Not every HOA represents a true community. Not everyone wearing a security jacket is there to protect you. Sometimes the most dangerous people come with fake badges, documents printed off their home computer, and a tone that says they believe they have power over your life. So I ask you, genuinely, if someone knocked on your door at 3 a.m., waved a homemade HOA warrant, and forced their way inside, what would you do? Do you know what your rights are? Have you taught your children how to tell the difference between real law and terrifying impersonation? Are you ready to stand up, even when everyone else stays silent? I hope you are. I hope you never let anyone take away your right to feel safe in your own home. If you've ever dealt with a Karen-style HOA, if you've ever been threatened, unfairly fined, or controlled by people misusing titles to enforce fear, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. We've been there, and we stood up. Not with guns, not with violence, but with truth, courage, and a child brave enough to say, no, stop. If this story meant something to you, hit like. Share this with your family and neighbors. Leave a comment, even if it's just, I've been through this too. Because change doesn't always start with courts, lawyers, or police. Sometimes it starts with one person brave enough to speak up. Are you ready?